morning. Welcome. Thank you for coming to join us today. Dina Bélanger, what inspiration for today? I am assistant professor at the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies at Laval University in Quebec. We have the pleasure of hosting the event around the figure of Blessed Dina Bélanger, known as Mother Saint Cecile of Rome, a nun of Jesus and Mary, born in 1897. My colleague, Professor Elaine Champagne, is a co-organizer with Mr. Louis Martin Lancier, director of the Centre Dina-Bélanger in Quebec, and Sister Lourdes Vargas, provincial counselor for the Religious of Jesus and Mary. Thank you, Elaine, for this great opportunity. We must begin with some practical indications. First of all, you've noticed that simultaneous translation is available. To listen in English or Spanish, choose on your Zoom webinar screen at the bottom of the screen. Interpretation is provided by Claudette Lemire from Lyon and Judith Pereira from Madrid, José Terrien from Bellechasse, and Lourdes Vargas from Quebec, whom we thank. Your cameras and microphones will remain off, but it is possible to interact with us using the chat, or even better, the questions and answers in Zoom. During our preparation, Elaine Champagne told me that the Religious of Jesus Mary have centers on several continents. We are delighted to have more than 170 registrations for this webinar and to see so many of you with us this morning, or maybe it's already evening for you. Dina Bélanger is an important figure, not just for the religious history of Quebec, but because she has international influence. We'll begin our program with words of welcome and thanks. Then we will watch certain interviews filmed with older nuns of Jesus and Mary, whose convent Dina Bélanger had joined at age 24 in 1921, which she remained until her death in 1929. After these testimonies, we'll have a musical interlude, and then we'll move on to presentations from 3 academic panelists who will share their perspectives on Dina's life and work. Let me just call her Dina, because from hearing about her and reading about her over the past few weeks, I seem to have gained some familiarity with her. These presentations will be followed by a moment of discussion and questions that you can send by chat, after which we will hear more musical works recorded to underline the intersection between music and spirituality, one of the themes that brings us together around the figure of Dina Bélanger. Therefore, begin with a word of welcome from Professor Guy Jobin, Dean of the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies at the University of Laval. I would like to greet Mr. Lancier from the Centre Dina-Bélanger in Quebec, Sister Lourdes Varcel, Sister Françoise Barra, and Professor Boulian and Madame Penelope, members of the group and members of different communities, religious communities. Welcome. I welcome all of you. This was an initiative of both the university and the center. It's important to reflect on the spiritual heritage of this young woman. It's part of the inheritance of Quebec, the Church of Quebec, consecrated to the work of a young woman who was carried away by disease in 1929 at the age of 33. I'm delighted that the University Laval and the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies are associated with this festivity through what it knows how to do best, which is to take time for reflection, research, and the dissemination of this reflection, research on the legacy of Mother Saint Cecile de Rome. Listening to inspiration, listening to breath, what we discern in the life and the writings of Dina Bélanger, what carried her, what nourished her during her short life. At the same time, how does the Spirit speak to contemporaries through her? What can we hear? How can Dina Bélanger's life reach us today? These questions and many others animate the quest to know about the person and the work of Blessed Dina. The academic world does not have a monopoly on the answers to these questions, but it answers them in its own way. That is to say, using a rigorous and clear method. I am therefore delighted that the faculty and the university have been asked to contribute to a better understanding, at least an understanding for our time, of the legacy of Dina Bélanger. May this activity precisely give the sting of research in musicology, theology, and ethics on the life and work of Blessed Dina. I warmly thank the people who collaborated in the planning and realization of this activity, which launches the festivities of the Dina Bélanger year. I hope that the discussions this morning will be food for the mind and that they will stimulate your curiosity. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your words of welcome, Mr. Jobin. Now we will listen to Sister Françoise Barra, who is the Provincial Superior in Canada of the Religieuses of Jesus Mary. Greetings to Mr. Jobin, Louis Martin, as well as to the members of his committee, Mrs. Elaine Champagne, and dear sisters of the Congregation of Jesus Mary, and each one of you, greetings. This webinar, organized by the Faculty of Theology and of Religious Sciences of the University of Laval, the Dina Bélanger Center, is the realization of a dream which arrived at the very beginning of our preparation for the celebration of the 125th anniversary of the birth of Dina Bélanger. It's a priority among all the suggestions. Why? Here are some of the reasons. As a woman from Quebec, musician, religious, Dina Bélanger is the person who gathers us here this morning. 125 years ago, she has succeeded in interesting people representing different horizons. Chair of Leadership in Spiritual Theology, the Chaire Claire-Bonenfant, Women, Cultures and Society, panelists coming from different sectors of culture, theology, philosophy, music, religious of her congregation and of other congregations. Moreover, coming from everywhere in the world, because this webinar will reach many people of different countries who speak either French, English, or Spanish. I believe that the reason is that in this one woman, there are many women within her discreet and extremely rich personality. In fact, Dina is known in numerous countries of the world. Pilgrims come from different countries to pray at her tomb. People write to ask for information, to confide prayer intentions. However, Dina is not well known here in Quebec, and the multiple richness of her personality is even more unknown. Many people have heard spoken of her as blessed and mystical, but even so, the depths of her writing and their universal scope remains little understood. It seems, therefore, that this dream, making Dina known in the university setting, launched a flow of interest, which we had never suspected before. I consider this as a Kairos moment, a time particularly appropriate to reveal what Dina can bring to our contemporaries of the 21st century. The title of this webinar expresses it marvelously. Listening to Dina Bélanger. What inspiration for today? Yes, let us listen to the voice of our three speakers. in order to discover or rediscover this woman of God who has something to say to our world today. Yes, she can inspire each and every one of us on our own ground. Let us open our spirits and our hearts to what our panelists have to share with us. I wish all of us here a good morning and a good afternoon to those following the webinar from Europe, Africa, or Asia. Thank you, Sister Françoise. We now, the director of Centre Bélanger in Quebec. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. This coming April 30 will mark Dina Bélanger's 125th anniversary of birth. My appointment as the first lay director of the Dina-Bélanger Center testifies to the will of the religious of Jesus Mary to transmit the heritage of this important figure of the Church of Quebec and to find new ways of highlighting her life and her writings. The Dina-Bélanger Center began in 1990 in the wake of the project of Dina Bélanger's beatification. Its objective was to make known the message of this young woman who has a singular destiny. 3 decades after her beatification, Dina Bélanger nevertheless remains unknown in her homeland. Today's webinar is part of this desire to find current ways to reach our contemporaries and to present to them the spiritual journey of this woman who lived in the 20th century. It seems significant to us that academics reflect on the writings of this woman, an artist, a religious, and a mystic, in order to bring out new perspectives. For these good words, it's time now to thank other partners who have supported this project. We would like to thank the Claire-Bonenfant Chair, Women Knowledge Society, the Hub of Feminist Studies at Laval University, for its support in the dissemination of this event around an important woman in the history of Quebec. Now we ask Professor Elaine Champagne and Louis-Martin Lantier will take the floor directly to present to us in more detail the context and prospects of this event. Good afternoon and good morning to everyone who has joined us today. In 2013, the University of Laval inaugurated the Chair of Educational Leadership in Spiritual Theology and Spiritualities of the Faculty of Theology. Teaching-oriented, the directors of the chair aim to support and develop a better understanding of the spiritual experience and its expressions in the great religious traditions, and particularly in Christianity. The teaching with this chair is directed, refers to its form of interpreting contemporary spiritual experiences. In particular, in the light of great Christian spiritual masters. So we're glad to have, we're interested in the activities of investigation to explore the texts of the great spiritual masters, pay special attention to the spiritual writings. We are interested in the autobiography of Dina Bélanger as a way of interpreting the contemporary spiritual experience. The context of the Quebec Society and of the West in general, how can we join an approach and an adequate speech to spread the message of a religious figure like Dina Bélanger? This was the question asked by the Centre Dina-Bélanger and the religious Jesus Mary on the occasion of the 125th anniversary. To find some answers to this question, we thought it would be good to give the floor to intellectuals with different backgrounds in the university field. Fernand Dumont speaks of updating her heritage, of making it accessible to anyone who speaks today. However, today as yesterday, we are confronted with the great questions of origin, of suffering, of death. As Frédéric Lenoir reminds us, how did Dina deal with these questions? The spiritual experience of Dina is part of the search for identity and meaning. For her, experience with a capital E is at the heart of her message. Dina listens, observes, feels, and touches a mystery that surpasses her. She cannot keep this mystery to herself and shares it with us like a secret in her own words. The word love appears more than 700 times. This is the reason why Dina Bélanger gave to her autobiography the title My Song of Love. Besides this autobiography, published in 1955, after 30 years of being silent, some theological writings were published in 1955. Then academic publications concerning her after that are non-existent. In short, the place is free to further explore her heritage. For this, we have a rich testimony of her inner life, her biography, some of her musical compositions, a large number as well of archival documents were destroyed by fire in 1983. Due to the time we have today, we chose to concentrate on the text written by herself as well as in her music. We'll hear more about it later. The reader of Dina quickly discovers various ways that will be necessary to explore to better understand the scope of her message, the historical and cultural context of her time, environment, the influence of the arts, characteristics and traits of Quebec of her time, the spiritual environment and religious environment that was hers, things that influenced her, the thought currents that were proper to her time. Feminist studies were not far behind. A bold young woman who leaves Quebec to live in New York, an artist, a concert performer. She was also a teacher, a poet in her spare time. How can she be placed among the great figures of Quebec of her time? How to approach her spirituality with respect to the two Teresas? What is her? We remember Teresa of Avila and Teresa of Lisieux. What is Dina's originality according to these three perspectives? Thanks to her rich personality, her radiance testifies to the vitality of what inspires her. The table is set for a new multidisciplinary exploration of what Dina bequeaths to us. For us, some biographical references will be useful. Dina Bélanger was born in 1897, marked by women playing for education, for the right to vote. From an early age, Dina showed an attraction to religion. Her identity as a believer is first built through a personal spiritual experience. At the age of 8, she begins to play the piano. Joseph Arthur Bernier, an organist, notices her musical talent and takes her under his wing. 1916 to 1918, Dina continues to study music in New York, which would later become the famous Juilliard School or Conservatory. Then from 1918 to 1921, it's a time of her, when she thinks of becoming a religious. Then she enters the convent of Jesus Mary in Sillery. She receives the name of Marie Sainte-Cécile de Rome. Her superior does not measures quickly the depth of her interior life and asks her to write her life. She is later attacked by scarlet fever and later tuberculosis. She dies in her 33rd year. The witnessing of a woman who was ardent and full of the love of God. Dina's life is divided into great parts. Her spiritual journey comes from the beginning of her childhood. And then the second part is tells us her reflections, her meditations. The language, of course, is very different from ours. The experience is unique. Dina expresses it in a language that is typical of her time. We try to decode this language. What can it tell us today? We can make a bridge between the past and the present. We'll have benefited of the religious of Jesus Mary. I won't say more for the moment. All these perspectives, I insist that there would be material here for young students who would like to write their thesis for their master's or for their doctorate. I give the word now to Sister Lourdes Vargas, who will tell us how she achieved, how she realized the videos of with the elderly sisters. We will look at a few extracts of these testimonies. Thank you. I want to tell you that we think that really Dina is closer to us than she is far. We spoke to some students who were pupils of Dina. We thought we could gather the witnesses, the testimonies of sisters who knew her, who had the same mistress of novices, Mother Saint Elizabeth. So this is what we did. We chose to be very brief in what we said to the nuns before the interview, so they could be spontaneous in their comments. We would like to hear from you about religious life during your first years in community. It was an adaptation of the phenomenological approach. The questions are very open, and it's above all a question of making the person talk about the phenomenon, about his or her experience of what is in question. Basically, it's the main question that's important, and the sub-questions just happen as a link. For example, what was community life like? And their memories return. We prepared these At first, the contact, we spoke with superiors. After a first encounter, 3 days before the interviews, the sisters came for the recording. We did it in the chapel close to the tomb of Dina, a wink to Dina. That day, it was very rich. We wanted to understand the context in which Dina lived at that time and in space, to understand the religious life and the vocation. The sisters were a bit nervous. What can I say that could be so important? My religious life was ordinary, nothing in particular. I don't remember anything, one would say. It's 70 years ago. But when that time came, they were calm. I told them, no notes, no papers, just speak from the heart. And I would like to thank them from the bottom of my heart. They were available, open-hearted. They are 90 years and over. They all understood, and in all humility too, that their memory is a great treasure for us, for the congregation, above all for our history, for the present and for tomorrow. Now, we will listen to them on the video. Thank you.
Ça fait au moins 70 ans que je suis religieuse. Et à l'époque où je suis entrée au noviciat, ce n'était pas tellement rigide. C'était vraiment une vie simple que nous menions, avec, comme dans toute bonne organisation, il y a de l'ordre. C'est la cloche qui nous invitait aux différentes activités.
Religieuse, ben ça fait 72 ans. J'ai fait profession en 1950. Ça fait 72 ans. Oui, c'est toute une vie, c'est beaucoup, beaucoup.
Parce qu'au noviciat, c'était silence. Ça, c'était un gros pas à faire, parce qu'on était habitué au bruit dans notre famille et tout. Et puis, c'était le silence. Beaucoup de silence.
Je suis entrée en 49. Oui, au noviciat, c'était au-dessus de l'escalier. Quand on descendait l'escalier, c'était écrit en haut. Si tu commence parfaitement. Alors, ça voulait dire que les consignes qu'on nous donnait, le règlement à suivre, bien, on suivait bien.
Quand nous quittions notre famille, nous la quittions pour toujours. Nous ne retournions pas dans nos familles. Pour moi, j'étais portée par ce désir d'être religieuse. Donc, le départ dans ma famille, moi, ça n'a pas été terrible. Mais quand je pense à mes parents, et quand je pense que 5 ans après moi, ma sœur Germaine a fait la même démarche, pour les parents, il y avait sûrement une grande joie. Mes parents ne se sont pas objectés à ce que nous entrions à Jésus-Marie, même si on partait pour toujours. Mais par après, je ne sais pas pourquoi, peut-être parce que j'étais un petit peu plus mûre, j'ai compris ce que ça pouvait être pour eux.
Bon, la vie communautaire était bien établie, avec une vie de prière, vie de travail, vie de récréation et aussi le repos.
J'ai été 11 ans chez les Ursulines à Shawinigan. J'ai fait mes 11 années là, de primaire et de secondaire. Puis, après ça, j'ai fait 3 ans de collège à Jésus-Marie, à Québec, ici. Mais je n'étais pas intéressée parce que les Ursulines, elles étaient cloîtrées et elles allaient au parloir derrière des grilles. les parents allaient voir derrière des grilles. Moi, ça ne m'intéressait pas du tout.
Il fallait une lettre de notre curé pour dire qu'on était une bonne personne. Puis il y avait un certificat médical, c'était exigé aussi.
Puis quand on travaillait, on était à la salle de couture, par exemple. C'était une salle où plusieurs travaillaient. C'est là qu'on faisait de la couture. On faisait des scapulaires verts. Ensuite, une était responsable de faire le repassage des tuniques des élèves. Ça, c'était son art.
Quand on entre, on est postulante. Ensuite, on est novice canonique. Ensuite, novice. Pendant mon postulat, j'ai eu la chance de pouvoir avoir de l'enseignement. Pas juste des exercices de piété, pas juste des petits services communautaires. J'ai pu enseigner. J'avais enseigné 2 ans, donc j'ai pu enseigner. Pendant mon année, ce qu'on appelle le noviciat canonique, on n'avait pas de rapport avec l'extérieur.
À ce moment de formation, je crois, approximativement, je peux dire que nous étions 25 à peu près.
25.
Oui, avec les postulantes. Postulantes et novices. Nous étions ensemble.
Jésus-Marie, les religieuses se promenaient tout le temps dans le grand corridor après aux récréations en parlant, ayant beaucoup de plaisir. Pendant 3 ans, je les ai vues et j'ai dit, bien, c'est Jésus-Marie.
On avait des moments de récréation. Puis on s'entendait bien parce que, au fond, les novices, toutes celles qui étaient là, répondaient à un même appel du Seigneur. Puis avaient le même désir de se donner, puis de faire aimer Jésus et Marie.
Alors, chacune avait une tâche particulière. Moi, j'ai travaillé ce que j'appelle à la dépense, aller pour les nourritures, aider, passer les desserts chaque jour, couper le beurre par petits carreaux. C'était des activités sur à faire dans le temps.
Il y avait la télévision qui commençait. Il y avait ce qu'on appelait la laiterie Laval qui organisait des émissions de télévision, des questionnaires pour les jeunes. Ça s'appelait les jeunes talents. Du mois de janvier jusqu'au mois de juin, avec mes élèves, j'allais à la télévision pour ce questionnaire. Nous avons gagné jusqu'au mois de juin. La laiterie Laval a organisé un goûter parce qu'on avait gagné. Nous, comme semi-cloîtrés, nous n'avions pas la permission de manger avec les personnes du monde.
Alors, je ne connaissais pas beaucoup la vie religieuse comme telle. Alors, c'était tout du nouveau. Je me souviens, une fois, on est entrés 2 ensemble du collège et elle avait découvert un livre dans lequel il fallait garder silence. Alors, ça avait été toute une découverte. C'était silence toute la journée, sauf au moment des récréations.
Les serveurs nous distribuaient différentes choses, puis on disait merci. Vous ne pouvez pas? Non, nous ne pouvons pas.
Quand on se rencontrait, on se saluait en disant la devise. Loué soit à jamais Jésus et Marie. Et l'autre répondait Amen.
Je n'avais jamais pensé devenir une religieuse toute ma vie avant ça.
Chacune, on faisait nos habits. Ensuite, une autre chose qu'on faisait aussi, on marquait notre linge. On a tout marqué notre linge en point de croix. Chacune devait préparer son trousseau.
Dans mon cœur, je me disais, je ne comprends pas, mais j'étais bien quand même. J'ai pas eu de rancœur envers ma communauté parce que je n'avais pas cette possibilité de partager ce qui nous était présenté.
Quand on était novice, on n'avait pas le droit de parler au prophète. Il fallait une permission pour ne pas avoir différentes directions. C'était la maîtresse des novices, en fait, qui assumait la direction de notre vie pendant ce temps-là. J'étais heureuse dans ça, oui.
Il y a des dortoirs qui étaient... On était entouré de rideaux, là, 3 rideaux. Ça, c'était mon premier. Le deuxième, je pense qu'il y avait juste un rideau. C'était des murs en bois. Ça, où j'étais habituée, j'avais campé chez les guides, couché dans les tentes. Oh, ça ne me dérange pas. Je coucherais encore comme ça, puis ça me dérangerait absolument pas.
Mais toujours, il n'y avait pas de porte, c'était un rideau qui fermait. Oui. Très, très simple, un lit, puis une petite table pour la toilette à côté. Mais on n'allait pas là le jour. Le jour, on demeurait toujours dans la communauté. Même pour aller au dortoir dans le jour, il fallait une permission. On était jeunes à ce moment-là. On n'avait pas besoin de faire de sieste. Le postulat, on avait une robe noire, mais on avait une mantille. Il y avait le voile blanc pour les novices, puis le voile noir quand on faisait profession.
Je n'ai pas regretté une journée, une seconde, jamais regretté. Moi, j'ai toujours été heureuse à Jésus-Marie, je le suis encore.
Thank you very much for these testimonies. It gives us a good idea of their community life that Dina lived. Vous êtes toujours là? Je suis contente. J'espère que oui. I'm sorry. Everybody's there. Thank goodness. Now we will hear from our three panelists, who will be Mrs. Penelope, who the three of them will each speak about 10 minutes. You can use on your computer, you have questions and answers, Q and R. So you can use that for jotting down your questions as they speak. So then you will remember the questions. At the end of each presentation, we will have some time. We will begin with Mrs. Penelope, who she has a doctorate in philosophy from Laval University and the Toulouse Catholic Institute. Her doctoral thesis focused on Alexis de Tocqueville and the issue of democratic equality. She did her postdoctoral internship at the Laval University, Faculty of Theology and Religious Sciences, and worked on the writings of Marie Gérin-Lajoie. A writer and political science graduate, Penelope is also a member of the research community on African issues at the Faculty of Theology and Religious Sciences at Laval. She also followed a training on the writings of Saint Teresa of the Child Jesus at the Institute of Teresian Studies in Lisieux, run by the Carmelites of the Paris province. Thank you, Florence. My conference this morning is entitled Welcoming Otherness with Dina Bélanger, from the love of God to responsibility for others. Thank you, all of you, for coming to listen to some of Dina Bélanger's words. Because like many faces of the church, like Thérèse de Lisieux, Marie Gérin-Lajoie, for example, her thoughts are very generous. It's generous. She appeals to many disciplines: poetry, music, philosophy, theology. Yes, in that sense, Dina was a generous person. Since the month of November, I've been asked to participate in this panel, and I had to find a theme within Dina's writings, which not only spoke to me as a philosopher, but most of all, capable of speaking to the world of today. What interested me in this request, it was to see that after her death, the thought of Dina Bélanger continues to resound as if she had written it today. Why resound? Because it often happens that we put the writings of a person who is not of our century in a drawer. And we think, often wrongly, that what she wrote was addressed to people of her time. Therefore, reading Dina became a challenge for me, because it was a matter of acting as if Dina was speaking to me like a philosopher. Initially, I thought of her commitment as a nun, and then as I read her autobiography, the question of otherness came to mind. It's a philosophical question that puts forward the idea or the relationship with others. Indeed, that is what the other is all about. To love him, there's me, myself, and I, but there's the other also. To love him as Jesus recommends, to respect him as a human being, to take care of him as our heart recommends. On this subject, Dina writes, I had an unspeakable horror of criticism, judgments about the conduct of others. In my thoughts, I attributed the best intentions to everyone, whether the actions were good or reprehensible. If the guilt seemed obvious, I found excuses. In my words, I avenged the absent. How I suffered when I had to be silent. If they were attacked in my presence, my face became serious. I tried by my silence to disapprove of slanderous or malicious remarks, and I watched for the favorable moment to slip in a word and divert the conversation. Yes, I have been and am very severe with myself on this point of fraternal charity. I valued other people's reputations more than my own. The problem of alterity or otherness is one of the essential components of contemporary philosophical discourse. It has certainly always existed throughout history, but with the phenomenon of migration and interculturality, it arises in a sharp way in today's society. Otherness is the character of what is other. We certainly exist in a specific society, but the fact of existing always makes us realize that we are never alone. That is why we speak of otherness. It's necessary to always restore it to its ethical charge, which aims at the notion of responsibility for others. It goes beyond the meeting or the cohabitation, because it opens us. Here we have the crossing of the term of otherness with the thought of Dina. It is therefore this intersection that will be the subject of my lecture, which lets itself be guided by a question. Where are the places of the enunciation of otherness in Dina Bélanger? I will talk about the relationship to the other in the writings of Dina by specifying the places she enunciated otherness in her autobiography. The concept of otherness in Dina is introduced by the encounter with the other, the ethics of the presence of others. The presence of the other to Dina is an encounter, a relationship initiated with the other as a human being, as an other. She says, I had drawn more energy and personal oblivion from living together. I had been forced on many occasions to come out of myself. This is a fault that one of my mistresses had the goodness to point out to me from the first months of my boarding school, namely not communicating, never showing my impressions, my desires, or my feelings outside, keeping them all from me. Whereas by expressing them sometimes, the others could benefit from it. As Dina writes, charity and attention to others become the places where this otherness responsibility is expressed. Because from the moment I am in front of others, I know what I have to do, and I know that I must not wait for anyone else to do it, because at that moment, I am responsible for the other. Dina also demonstrates by her actions and by her sense of sacrifice that loving Jesus is inconceivable without loving one's neighbor. As otherness assumed at the heart of individual freedom, such otherness draws its vision only from the Word of God, from the great commandment of love. If there is God, Jesus, and Mary, then there is the law of love. And if there is love, there are also others. Responsibility begins with the arrival of the other and introduces the need to take care into our daily life. It is therefore the presence of the other next to Dina which leads to responsibility. Here we will limit ourselves to 3 places where Dina's alterity is expressed: family, friends, and religious community. Family legacy. In Dina, the notions of love for Jesus and that of charity. If we have to count the number of times that Dina uses the notion of charity, we can understand that it is a notion which not only has importance for her, but above all, it's a notion which partly gives a vision of others, her vision. The influence of her family is essential because in terms of consideration and responsibility for others, Dina's parents, who were devout Christians, were the first to teach her the meaning of the other. She says it in these terms: all my life, I have seen my parents open their hands very wide to help the poor, give abundant alms right and left, console with their religious and encouraging words, with multiple and prolonged visits with the most needy, and how often the most vile and repulsive. To console, I say, and to help the afflicted, the sick, the suffering, hidden misery, unknown need, increased, if possible, their devotion. Their happiness has always been to give in silence, in secrecy. I have often heard them say, don't put my name, or again, this is for you, don't talk about it. How many anonymous submissions. During her trip to New York, she rediscovers others and she gives up her own pleasure for the good of the other. And this, she's ready to renounce to her pleasure for the pleasure of the other. When she was in New York, she will give the fact of having a private room to give to the other, so for the good of the other. Then the second place is the religious community. She has responsibility how she lived with the other sisters of the congregation. She chose this congregation. Dina has is thinking of it because the mission of this congregation is through Christian education on all social circles and with preference for the young and among them the poor. So Dina can appreciate this tradition, pushes towards the other, leads to consider the other and help him for his integral promotion. Gina is a member of this congregation, and she is has solidarity with the objectives. Alterity becomes a place of mission, a possibility of loving, and to renounce to her own desires. When the community engagement is there, she will show consideration for others. God always takes the way of mankind. The mission of the congregation was to be realized in the presence of others. The love of God is manifested by her love of others. She assumes the responsibility that comes to her to listen and to teach. In short, Dina, the presence of the other is the key to social responsibility. She realizes the great commandment which invites us to love our neighbor. As a result, she implicitly suggests, in order to think about the relationship with others, to return to St. John, who says, I love God. If someone says, I love God, while he has hatred for his brother, he is a liar. Indeed, he who does not love his brother whom he sees is incapable of loving God whom he does not see. For Dina, the other is essential. As I was telling you at the beginning, she is generous gives herself generously. I hope on other occasions the role of music in Dina's relationship with others will be thought about. For example, it is undeniable that music as a marker of identity was important in her life. She says, the musical work has brought me closer to the Lord. I offered him each of the notes played as so many acts of perfect love. The trace of Ignatian spirituality within the congregation of the Sisters of Jesus Mary is also to be taken into account. It makes it possible to present a Dina in contemplation and in action. She is active. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Penelope, for this presentation. We will go now to the co-organizer, Elaine Champagne, who is Associate Professor in the Third School of Theology and Religious Sciences and holder of the Chair in Educational Leadership, Spiritual Theology and Spiritualities. She has also a contemporary experience. She studies also the great Christian mystics and knowledge of pediatrics and long-term care for the sick, and theology is part of her mission. Good morning, good afternoon. We've been hearing about Dina, a young girl from here, more or less known in her milieu, a religious, musician, mystic, a bold, talented woman, captivated by God. What can her autobiography teach us for today about the spiritual life? Is it possible today to draw inspiration from her career? While I was preparing this communication, 4 key terms appeared to me to describe the spiritual journey that Dina tells us about. Within her journey, she has, the door is open for more studies. These 4 key terms are desire, imitation, participation, and surrender or abandonment to God. After a few method comments, I will pick up these themes one by one. First of all, reading Dina Bélanger, a method. I think it's important. To read an autobiography or to read a diary is to enter into the intimacy of a person, as if we were sharing his thoughts, his impressions. However, the author always remains foreign to us, in the sense that her experience is unique to her, belongs to her. Reading requires a certain renunciation. Ultimately, the experience is incommunicable. It belongs to the present, the person who lives it. Even for the author, she's telling us it's no longer present, but it's in her memories, her reflections. In her diary, an autobiography, we read with the author the meaning given to her experience. There is the interpretation of what she has lived. This interpretation touches me, my experience. It can reach me. And her interpretation can be part of mine also. It's called that distance that we have with Dina, will it keep us from understanding her? I think that, on the contrary, it will help us understand her better. As a reader, I am sensitive to the way Dina recounts, makes sense of the events she lives. There's a great desire with her. She is sensitive. From her parents, she learns not to give in to her strong ego and to focus her inner energies for the joy of God. By small daily gestures, she learned self-mastery, mastery of the senses, and interior mastery. As we saw in Penelope's conference, she's a generous person. My desire was to use the infinite merits and means that Jesus places at our disposal. He is our God, our Redeemer, and our Father. I wanted to use them for creatures of the past, of the present, and the future who might benefit from them. She makes the joy of God as a reaction on others. She is active in God's work so that a fairer, better world will come about. St. Paul the Apostle addresses this question when he hopes to work for gardeners in the field of God. Between the one who plants and the one who waters, there is no difference, but God gives each his reward according to his work. For we work together in the service of God, and you are God's field.
Dina exprime son grand désir de participer à l'œuvre de Dieu. Entre 21 et 24 ans, elle devient membre.
Dina expresses a great desire to participate in the work of God. Between the ages of 21 and 24, she became a member of the Third Order of St. Dominic. Her spirituality at the time greatly valued intercession, which we could translate as a work of influence in favor of the other, for those who may need it at the time. In Dina's day and up to Vatican II, some understanding of the theology of redemption shows the cross, suffering, and the death of Christ as a compensation for the evil committed by humans in the world. This theology, whose roots are complex, involves the risk of crude shortcuts that could lead people to believe in a judge and accountant God, thirsty for suffering in order to see the debt of evil committed paid. But this is not the God of Christians, even though many have feared him. I dwell on this question for a few moments because it seems essential to me in order to approach Dina's writings. Reading Dina's autobiography leaves no doubt about her faith in a loving and benevolent God, she turns with confidence. At the same time, her relationship to suffering is complex as it crosses her entire biography. This report would require an in-depth study that goes beyond the scope of our seminar, but it is necessary to approach it. The way it is close to that of Thérèse of Avila and Thérèse de Lisieux, even if the styles are very different. But the theologian and psychoanalyst Denis enlightens it as he looks at the suffering in Thérèse and probably in Dina. For his reflection, Denis is inspired by Simone Weil, a great French philosopher, Dina. Here is a quotation from Denis. God only knows evil as suffering. As the suffering, the one who loves and sees those he loves not living his life, but unliving. That is, living from the appearance of life. And it is by this sign, experiencing evil as suffering, compassion. It's evil that pains, the suffering of the other, my suffering. It is the desire to suffer is a desire to give. It sees evil as us. According to Simone Weil, evil is contagious. When we are irritable, those around us become irritable. In contact with a perfectly pure being, there is a transmutation. Sin becomes suffering. The philosopher then develops how the suffering of the innocent is redemptive. In this perspective, suffering is neither sought or valued. It is compassion. Now, there is a spiritual link between the love of Christ and the compassion of humans, tempted by the appearances of life rather than by life. Denis Vaz continues. Love is accomplished neither in suffering nor in the accusation of others, nor in claiming of the victim. Nothing stops it. It detaches the soul from all creation. It is the original gift and the infinity of desire. These few reflections offer a key to understanding the child games that Dina speaks of. When Jesus asks her, "Will love the most?" Pushed to the end of her arguments as to the greatness of her love, Dina replies that she loves Christ with the heart of Christ. It is through the love of Christ that she can love Christ. We'll come back later to this formula of the heart. Again, continues a little later when the little king asks Dina to play the cross. "My sufferings have an infinite value," said Jesus. "What are yours worth?" Jesus answers happily, Dina answers, "Happily, I unite them to yours, and thus my poverty is covered by your infinite merits." It is the desire for love that mobilizes Dina, a love entirely turned towards God. We could look in the history of spirituality for expressions of this desire for perfection. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. To let Christ live within you. A widely distributed classic at the time was The Imitation of Jesus Christ. Dina lives it in this formula that the Apostle Paul gives us. "I am crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." This spiritual path to let Christ act in oneself is common in the beginning of the 19th century in Quebec.
Il y a comme une participation,
There is a participation in an intimacy in her life that is given. The last point is oblation or surrender, the abandonment to God or oblation is a participation in this. Here, we need to deepen this theme. Her desire for the substitution of Christ within her. Love seemed to me to unite suffering and joy. I saw them both being born in the heart of Jesus. Dina renounces herself to let Christ live in her. She does it actively. She repeats to let love be. At the same time, her desire makes her a full participant in this love, a love that has its source in the heart of Christ. It is also from this heart that the love of God is given. Let him take some place, and she lets herself be divinized. She, at the time, this theology was important. It's a steep road that Dina took. I think that this woman, absorbed as she is in God, in the Eucharistic heart and with his heart, she turns with Christ towards her brothers and sisters with whom she is in solidarity, discerning to be able to seize this inner life that beats in the heart of Dina, the giving of herself to her first love. She did nothing extraordinary. In the end, she had an ordinary life. The contemporary spiritualities give a lot of attention to the way we treat others. To me, it is not expressed clearly enough. It invites me to reread her text to find how she takes care of others. Her solidarity is linked to Christ's love of others. It goes further than her acts. My God, I no longer know how to tell you how much I love you. I would like all the symphonies of silence, all the poetry of unknown suffering, to sing that I love you. I would like the eloquence of all the martyrs and the simplicity of nothingness to modulate my hymn of gratitude. Thank you very much. Now we will look at the questions which you have sent, and we will not hesitate to send us your questions in the box, questions and answers and we now present Sandria, who is studied in musicology, and she has at the Université Laval. She has in literature and culture. She is interested in the history, the process of transmission through translation. She is the principal professor in history, has studied the contribution of women, the same preoccupations in the Faculty of Music. She also writes for the Review. Thank you very much for an introduction. I am happy to be among you to speak about Dina Bélanger from the perspective of music, especially in the history of Quebec. The composers of the 1910s and 1920s seem to have left few traces.
Si les musiciennes et les compositrices des années 20 et des années 1910 et 20,
the 1910s and 1920s in Quebec, these musicians left few traces. It's because of they changed names and careers when they got married, for example, and also the difficulty of getting published and the low esteem granted by the history of music to instrumental teaching also placed women on the side of oblivion. Finally, there is the work ignored or little known by all those who have remained far from the spotlight, those whose music came to life in the private spaces of their homes, their parish, or their religious community. Dina amazes us. She is both solid and fragile, a virtuoso and intimate. She plays Saint-Saëns and Liszt, and she limits her concerts to charities in her region. She was first in her class in harmony at the New York Conservatory, and she devoted herself to the composition of pieces conducive to contemplation. It is in the remarkable and little-known musical journey of Dina Bélanger that lays at the center of my remarks today. A step of my research went to secondary sources. What I read more specifically of nuns in the history of music in Quebec, to mention the work of musicologists Marie-Thérèse Lefebvre, Céline Huot, Réon, many others. Then my reading of the autobiography was enriched by various sources, such as letters, archival documents, written testimonies, and film interviews, which were shared with me by the Dina-Bélanger Center. Thank you to Mr. Louis-Martin Lanty and Sister Lourdes. These sources then dictated the research that I conducted in the press and newspapers of Quebec and New York to help me weave between them some threads of this life story. Dina's journey is typical of the more privileged than average family. In 1908, she has obtained an intermediate class piano diploma. In 1909, she left the Saint-Roch convent to join the classes of the Academy of the new Jacques Cartier convent. It was there that she continued piano and music theory lessons with Sister Saint-Edmé. On July 11, 1910, the girl's name appears in the Montreal Star. The Daily published an article listing all the candidates in the province who had graduated from the Dominion College of Music. In the district of Quebec and the surrounding area, Dina Bélanger appears in the list of 42 girls or women who obtained the intermediate grade for pianoforte playing. Founded in 1894, affiliated with Bishop's University in Sherbrooke, this college's mission was to pass practical and theoretical exams. A branch was established in Quebec between 1905 and 1917. In September of 1911, Dina was 14. She entered the Bellevue College boarding, also run by the nuns of the congregation of Notre Dame, where quality music lessons were given. It was during her years at boarding school that she received encouragement from Father Omer Cloutier, soon to be Monseigneur Cloutier, to continue her piano.
En décernant des diplômes répartis sur environ 10 niveaux. Dans tous les cas, ces marques de reconnaissance témoignent du fait qu'elle est apte à suivre la voie d'une professionnalisation.
Dina is very grateful for the help that she got from Monseigneur Cloutier. The Monseigneur Cloutier, speaks to the parents and asks that she be given 2 years of further training in piano in New York. This Joseph Arthur Bernier, who was organist, took her under his wing. Throughout 1910, he toured Quebec and Ontario, playing the organ. In New York, at the chosen Institute for Musical Art, the future Juilliard School of Music, Bishop Cloutier knew the institution as well as the pension of the Religious of Jesus Mary. It was Our Lady of Peace in New York. It had a library, a music room, a residence for women on the 14th Street East in New York. The New York Institute of Music Art is located at the corner of 122nd Street and Broadway, 10 kilometers north of the Broad boarding school. The students went there by bus. The institute was founded in 1905 by choir master and voice teacher Frank Damrosch. In 1910, he gave a lecture to the Women's Christian Association of Ottawa, where he extolled the merits of opera and true musical education. In 1911 and 1912, advertisements in Canadian newspapers promoted high-level musical training. Dina leaves Quebec for Manhattan, accompanied by 2 other French-Canadian girls, Aline Marquis, 4 years her senior, met sometimes in musical circles, and discovered the capital at the same time as Dina. Marie-Marguerite Juliette Aline is the daughter of the rich industrialist, M. François Cagnac, Marquis de Saint-Malo. The third traveler is Bernadette Letourneau, whom Dina knew from having been gig mates together for a year. In the fall of 1916, Bernadette began her second year of training in New York. She and Dina will share the same room from 1916 to 1918. And Bernadette will also join the Jesus Mary congregation on the same day as Dina. She received the name of Marie Saint-Omer de Luxeuil. She had to speak English to understand and to listen in English. She said it was fun, especially at the beginning. Happily, the pianos possessed the same sonority in the different countries, even though the names of the notes follow the whims of the language. But she says it's worth leaving Quebec to listen to an artist like that. She heard Paderewski's festival and was ravished by his speaking, as was the whole Carnegie Hall. He played Liszt in contact. These teachers, museums and shops, churches and concerts, Dina opens herself wide. Dina took advantage of these artistic enjoyments available to her, while being of severe caution when attending concerts.
Sont marqués par plusieurs concerts présentés devant public, le plus souvent dans le contexte d'événements caritatifs parrainés par des paroisses.
Then Dina becomes a concert pianist just before and after studying in New York, marked by several concerts presented in front of an audience, most often in the context of charitable events sponsored by parishes. In her autobiography, Dina clearly displays difficulty in following the path of musical art as a concert pianist. Dina prefers to practice the piano in private, play repertoire of her liking, and making it a time for meditation. So here we see an extract of what she played. She remembered playing a rhapsody, Hungarian rhapsody, and her cousins loved it especially. Whenever they gathered, they asked her to play it, and she never showed fatigue, but always pleasantly, with a nice smile, without showing impatience. She would feel their desire. Concerts in which Dina participated are as discreet as her, at least for traces that are accessible on the web. But this absence can be explained by the fact that announcements and programs for charity or parish concert are almost always broadcast through parish bulletins. These loose sheets contained everything a good citizen should know about the activities of his parish. Dedicated to an ephemeral life, these documents are not yet collected in archives. I only found one concert to cite as an example, more than 5 times in the newspaper Le Soleil through the month of January 1919. The event in question took place at the College of Beauport on January 20 at 8 o'clock. Dina also taught piano at Silbury. She made her debut as a piano teacher in the summer of 1920. In 1921, when she was preparing for her novitiate, the Jesus Mary congregation entrusted her with some piano students. This step officially marks her employment debut. She loved each of her pupils. They have great admiration and respect for her. Too early, alas, these lessons were interrupted by illness. Dina also composed. She excelled in each of these roles. A third musical discipline perhaps best met her research for solitude and spiritual creation. From the moment she was preparing to enter the New York Institute, Dina began studying harmony and says that from the first lesson, I felt a special attraction for this branch of music. In the sequel, by tendency, I would have neglected the piano to link chords. She continued her distance education by taking harmony classes for which she had to write composition homework every week. There were so many ideas, it seemed to me, in my head, and I liked to entrust them to notes and chords. Although Dina describes her musical conditions as artistically void, the testimonies collected in the aftermath of Dina's death present them in a different light. Sister Marie Saint-Antoine de Padoue, director of Sylvie Boarding School, notes that Dina had prepared several musical compositions for the novitiate celebrations, songs, hymns, sketches, and that over the seasons her talent for composition gives her the opportunity to render many services to her community. Sister Marie-Elisabeth mentions that Dina sometimes composed songs to tease or entertain the nuns. She also composed 7 canticles of gratitude for the Eucharistic heart. The fire of 1983 ravaged the convent of Sylvie, and the archives were completely dispersed or disappeared. Conclusion, the heritage. I would like to have told you many other things. There were 45 female religious composers listed by Claire Léon, who alone would have produced more than 700 musical scores. Other opportunities will arise because Saint Cécile de Rome has not finished making the piano sing and resound. At her funeral mass, her pianist, organist, and composer friend Myrthe Mère de Luxeuil composed a hymn to pay homage to her. In 1984, day after the College of Jesus Mary burnt, a performance hall was inaugurated, which would bear Dina's name, which now welcomes dozens of music students every year. A musical album was dedicated to her in 1997, presented 4 of her compositions, others inspired by her also. In 2008, she starred in a musical composed by Louis-Marie Lantier. In 2022, she would have encouraged us to look into more. Thank you very much, Sandria. I think we've come to the end of this event. We had to keep a few points in conclusion. There is lots of terrain to explore, and the importance of understanding her context and also her contribution, what Dina brings to our world. We would like to thank Emily Casista and Mario Gervais, Ali Ouzanou, and the Campus Events Office, the administrative team who ensured the uploading of the material on video and who managed the registrations. Thanks also to Nancy Shank for her management assistance. Thanks to our interpreters into English and Spanish, Claudette Lemire and Judith Pereira, José Thérien and Lourdes Vargas. Thank you to the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies, in particular to the Chair of Spiritual Theology and Spirituality. Thank you for the Chair Claire-Bonenfant. Also express our gratitude to the Dina-Bélanger Center, its director, Louis-Martin Lantier, for his co-organization, as well as to Lourdes Vargas for helping in this and for having prepared the talks with the nuns of Jesus Mary. And thanks to them also. Thanks to Hélène Champagne, to Penelope, Natasha Mabungu Pemba, Sandria Boulian for their interventions. Finally, thank you to all of you who joined us from near or far to listen to Dina Bélanger and to see how she, her life, and her work can be an inspiration for us today.